Action.
Hi, so this is our next episode of the History Explorers with me, Elaine, Stella, who's in second grade, and Nora, who's in kindergarten. And today we're talking about Martin Luther King Jr. It was just his birthday and Martin Luther King Day.
Yep.
So, Nora, what do you know about Martin Luther King Jr.?
I know that he tried to make people be on the on whatever seat they want to be on the bus,
Right.
and also be on which toilet they want to be
Right.
on, and go on which bed they want,
Right? So they could all use the
and
same
not
drinking fountains and bathrooms and restaurants.
And also they attacked people that was a little black.
Right, so if they were very dark or even just a little bit dark skinned, black, right, white people would attack them. Yes.
And also he wanted everybody to be nice to everybody
Okay, right?
and not fight.
And not fight. So those are the things they talk about in school, right?
Yeah.
He was against segregation. He wanted everyone to have equal rights.
It's called segregation.
Segregation, which is separated. So, when we talk about Martin Luther King Jr., we often talk about the same quotes, right? They use the same quotes. They teach them in school or online or in TV shows. So, his I Have a Dream speech, the big speech that he did on the March to Washington, where he said, I have a dream that one day my children will not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character. The quote, I've decided to stick with love because hate is too great a burden to bear. So love, not hate.
Yeah, not hate.
Right.
That's no hate.
And darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. So those are the ones I see the most, right, about love. And those things are true. Those are good things. But a lot of times what we see is white people saying those words to black people, meaning don't fight. Just sit there and take it because that's peaceful, and that's what Martin Luther King Jr. would have wanted you to do. Okay, yes, Nora?
I forgot it.
Okay. And then nowadays when people go out and protest and they have their signs and they go out in the street, they say, and they block traffic so people will listen. They say, Martin never would have done that. You're not doing it right. Martin would have never done that. You need to wait. Did Martin never get in the street and march?
Yes.
He absolutely did.
Remember when we marched and the police had to stop from the cars getting in the road because we marched?
That's right. We've gone and marched. So Martin Luther King Jr. absolutely marched in the street and stopped traffic. The Selma March. And they were beat by the police. John Lewis, who is now in Congress, he was beat bad by the police. So he absolutely went into the street. But people like to not tell the whole story, right? They like to tell the parts they like and not tell everything. So that's why we're talking about Martin today. And so at school, the children usually learn about nonviolence.
Yeah, like in Thanksgiving, they didn't say the Americans came. They only said, and the Pilgrims came,
And they were
everything
friends.
was happy.
Right. They didn't say, then the Pilgrims killed everybody. Yeah, right. They just share the good stuff. So they talk about nonviolence and they talk about peace and sharing and those kinds of things. Yes, Nora?
It's not hate, it's love.
It's hate. Right, it's not hate, it's love. But they don't talk about one of the reasons, if you read about Martin, one of the reasons he advocated for nonviolence was to protect his people, because he knew that if they raised their hands against the police, they would be killed, just like happens today.
Yeah.
He knew that if they were fighting back out in the streets, if they were fighting back against the white people who were hurting them, people would take pictures and then show the pictures and say, look at these horrible black people. They're animals. They're fighting these white people. They're so violent. But if it's just a black person sitting there while a white person is spitting on them or hitting them or turning a hose on them, then there's no way anyone could say, look how violent that black person is being. He must have deserved it. So Was Martin saying just be quiet and never fight for your freedom?
No.
No. In fact, the people that went on these marches, they took classes beforehand where they sat and practiced being hit in the face, being spit on, having smoke blown in their faces, so that they learned not to react. They learned to just sit there and take it so that they could go on these peace marches and freedom rides and endure all this stuff without reacting. And if they did react, they weren't allowed to march. But it wasn't just because he wanted everyone to be quiet and take it and not fight back. He didn't want them to get killed, and he didn't want pictures taken of them and misconstrued. And he did in his heart. He wanted to fight hate with love and peace. Which is, we've been learning about Ruby Bridges. We checked this one out from the library.
Yep.
Right? The little girl who she was one of the first people to desegregate an elementary school, and she was so little and so brave. Yeah. And then we also read The Youngest Marcher, really good book about Audrey Faye Hendricks, and she participated in the Children's March, which was a march of just children. She was the youngest. She was 8, 9.
Yeah, and she'd go to jail, and she was a little kid.
She was a little kid, and she went to jail because they're like, if we fill up all the jails, then they can't put us in jail anymore. They'll have to listen to us.
Yeah, and let us free.
Right. So, so she was one of the youngest people who went to jail. And Martin said, let the kids march, because if people are taking pictures and they see these people being mean to these little kids, just like if they see them being mean to people who aren't fighting back, maybe people will realize what is going on and will help us, which is exactly what happened. So we're going to talk about, so that's what they teach in school. Some other adults, some other grown-ups on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, they post about him, and they talk about how Martin was very peaceful, how he was very patriotic, how he was conservative because he was a church pastor, and how he was a good capitalist. And those things aren't necessarily true, so we're going to talk about some of that. He was an American, but he didn't like how black people were being treated in his country. He was not a Republican. He actually said he was non-partisan. His father was a Republican, but then changed after his son's death. And I'll just read this quote. In 1952, he wrote a letter to his wife, Coretta Scott King, and he said, I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. He was killed while organizing the Poor People's Campaign, which was a multiracial alliance for the poor. And he was openly critical of Barry Goldwater, who was the Republican candidate during his lifetime. So those are all some truths there. Yes, Stella? In a minute. He also said, God never intended for one group to live in superfluous, inordinate wealth, while others live in abject, deadening poverty. He said that in 1963.
What does that mean?
So he's saying that God does not want some people to be super, super rich while others are poor and have no money for food or anything. Do we agree with that?
No.
Yeah. And then I'm going to read a couple other quotes. These are long, so I'm going to read my screenshots. Yeah, so this is letter from Birmingham jail. This is from when he was in jail in 1963. The March on Washington was 67, Jason?
What was it?
This was 63.
Okay.
He says, over the past years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block, they used to call black people Negroes, great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, remember we talked about the KKK, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action. who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. So he's saying peace is not absence of tension. Peace begins with justice and equality. And then one more. Okay, so this one is 1967.
Yeah.
He says the policymakers of the white society have caused the darkness. They create discrimination, they structured slums, and they perpetuate unemployment, ignorance, and poverty. It is incontestable and deplorable that Negroes have committed crimes, but they are derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society. When we ask Negroes to abide by the law, let us also demand that the white man abide by law in the ghettos. Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He flagrantly violates building codes and regulations. His police make a mockery of law, and he violates laws on equal employment and education and the provisions for civic services. The slums are the handiwork of a vicious system of the white society. Negroes live in them, but do not make them any more than a prisoner makes a prison. Let us say boldly that if the violations of law by the white man in the slums over the years were calculated and compared with the law-breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would be the white man. These are often difficult things to say, but I have come to see more and more that it is necessary to utter the truth in order to deal with the great problems that we face in our society. So, a lot of people like to say that Martin Luther King Jr. would not have approved of Colin Kaepernick today. That Colin Kaepernick is using nonviolent protest, but he's not doing it in the right way because he's not being patriotic and he's kneeling during the anthem. And so we ask ourselves, well, what is a country then? What is the anthem? What is the flag? Those are symbols of our country that we love. What is a country? Is it the land? Is it the symbol? Is it the government? Is it the rich people? Or is it all the people? What do you think?
It's all the people.
What do you think?
It's all the people.
It's not a symbol. It's not a flag. It's not a song. That's not our country. It's all the people in the country. And so Colin has sacrificed his whole career in a nonviolent protest. He's not hurting anybody or damaging property, because the people in this country are being treated unfairly. This is exactly the kind of protest Martin Luther King Jr. designed, organized, led. And some people say that Martin Luther King Jr. would have been against Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, an organization that their whole agenda is based on equality and justice for people of color. That's it. That's their agenda. So when you read through that last quote, and he wanted peace, but he also said a riot. What's the quote, Jason? A riot is the language of the oppressed. A riot is the voice of the unheard. Right. He's saying we need to look at the reasons behind those things. He would have absolutely supported Black Lives Matter, Colin Kaepernick, people marching in the streets. People like to use his words to hurt Black people. Let me say that again. White people like to use his words to hurt Black people and people of color. And so we need to remember the whole legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. He was for peace, but he was also for what? Fairness?
Yeah.
Honesty? Telling the truth?
Yeah.
Justice? Was he for the flag and songs, or was he for the people?
He was for the people.
He was for the people. Can we be brave like he was and stand up for the people?
Yeah.
Yeah? Do you think that's what God wants us to do? If there is a God.
She stand up for me one time.
Stand up for all our friends.
And sisters.
And sisters.
and
Okay.
brothers.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone want to share?
Also,
That's
they
Yes.
killed people that thought that they also had a little black.
If they were just a little black, yes. And, you know, we were talking about Trayvon the other day, right? Trayvon Martin. So Black Lives Matter was started by a woman who had a little brother. And she was so scared and so sad when she saw that Trayvon Martin, who was a kid, was murdered. Not only murdered, but the guy who murdered him did not go to jail. And she had a little brother. That's why she started Black Lives Matter. Because black people should not just be killed and their murderers not
Tell them
go
the story.
and not go to jail.
Tell
Yeah.
them the story.
We'll do a whole nother one on Trayvon sometime, okay, girls? And Tamir. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you all. Please read in depth about Martin Luther King Jr., one of our heroes. We love him very much. And thank you for listening.